I could spend the next hour just talking to you about mindfulness because I'm that passionate about it, but what would be more helpful, more beneficial for you is to actually experience what mindfulness is. So that's why there's the sort of 3 questions there. What is mindfulness? Why would I practice it? And actually, how do I even do that? So I'm really aiming to answer those 3 questions over the next hour. We spend so much of our day in our head, but our head isn't, although it's attached to our body, which is in the here and now, our head and our mind can be a million different places. Quite often our mind is in the past, so maybe you're sitting there thinking about what you had for lunch, or maybe conversations that you had with people over lunch, or what a speaker said earlier on today, or as I said, maybe your head's already gone into planning about what's going to happen next, or maybe you were just distracted by something going on in the room or in your own body. And the thing is, we limit ourselves when we allow our mind to just keep going into the past or the future, because when we do that, what we're often trying to do is change our experience. We want it to be different. We want to try and control it, even if we don't want to make it different. We want more of the good stuff and less of the negative stuff. But we limit ourselves when we allow our mind to wander so much, because the only place we actually have any control and influence is the present moment. So the past has happened, can't change it, much as we might try, and the future is a product of whatever happens in this present moment. So it makes sense, I think, to press pause every so often and just acknowledge where we are, just check in with ourselves. So I don't know how often you do that, and you perhaps do check in with yourselves a lot, but if not, maybe that's one thing that you can take away, is just moments where you just say, how am I right now? Without needing to change it, without needing to make anything different, just acknowledging how I am. But when I was thinking about if there was a word to describe my experience with mindfulness, the word I would use would be empowering. And when I was looking for an image to go with this, I came up with this one, and it made me chuckle. I'm not suggesting I'm a superhero or I've turned into Wonder Woman. However, the empowering bit is that I feel now, and I have felt since I've been practicing mindfulness, much more in control of my experience. And when I can't control what's happening to me, I can control, I have choice at least about how I respond to it. So I feel empowered, which has helped to build my resilience. And there was a real test of that. I mean, one of the reasons that I came to mindfulness was because I was going through fertility treatment. And I knew that there was a possibility the outcome would not be the outcome the husband and I wanted. And I knew from just talking to people and just knowing what's in the sort of public awareness that it wasn't going to be an easy journey. So I was looking for something to help me deal with the whole journey. And after many years of trying, rounds of IVF, my husband and I made the decision to accept life without children because it wasn't working for us, the treatment. And I don't know if or how I would have made that decision had it not been for my mindfulness practice. So it almost felt like it would have been an easier decision to just keep trying, but to make the decision to go, do you know what? Actually, maybe there's a different way that I can live my life. And I wouldn't say that I've put that entirely to bed and it never bothers me. It does. I've got nieces and nephews, and I do have that sense of what if. But what mindfulness has enabled me to do is really choose how I deal with that experience. And as a result, I have less of the kind of ups and downs of emotions, and I feel a little bit more kind of balanced and in control. So what is it? What are we talking about here? And you may have come across, possibly if you've come across a definition, the top one might be one you've heard of, because that's the one that's most commonly used. John Kabat-Zinn was the guy who brought mindfulness from its Buddhist origins, and that's where mindfulness began in Buddhism. But what he did was he recognized through his own practice the benefits potentially for the stress clinic that he was running in the US. So back in the 70s, he started bringing mindfulness in a very secular way to patients in his stress reduction clinic, and he developed the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which is the most commonly run 8-week mindfulness program globally. I run a mindfulness-based living course, which is a derivative of it. But anyway, what he says is mindfulness is about paying attention in a particular way, and that particular way is on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So we consciously choose to do it. We're doing it right now in the here and now, and the really difficult bit is we do it non-judgmentally. And what we notice, and you'll be aware of this if you practice mindfulness yourself, that we can notice what's happening, but there's also this sort of other voice that goes, oh, but I wish it was like this. Or, oh, this is great, I want more of this. Oh, I don't want this to ever end. Or, this is horrible, I wish it would end soon. There's a kind of commentary, so we're constantly judging. The practice of mindfulness is being able to pay attention to what's happening without needing to make it different. So mindfulness is about being more present more of the time. It's about stepping out of autopilot. Have you ever had the experience where you've got in your car, you've sat down, put your seatbelt on, turned the ignition on, and the next thing you're aware of, you've arrived at your destination? Okay, how do we manage to do that? If you can remember learning to drive, there was a lot of stuff you needed to think about, but yet we fairly quickly are able to do that kind of thing without thinking. Or you get up and very purposefully walk into the next room in your house to do something, and you get to the middle of the room and you stand there and go, why did I come in here? That ever happened to you? Yeah. It's not an age thing. We think it is, but it's not. It's because the time it took us to move from one room to the next, the initial thought we had about what we were going to do when we got there has got pushed out and replaced by goodness knows what else. Now, if you stand there for a few minutes, quite often the thought comes back. It's like, oh, yes, that's what I was going to do. So our mind is in autopilot. Our mind is busy. There's lots of stuff going on in there. So when we start being more present, being more mindful, we allow the mind to settle, which means we can see clearly what's really going on. And why would we want to do that? Well, there's lots of reasons. But one is we start to see what's actually going on, not our filtered, coloured version of what's going on. So when it comes to making a decision about what am I going to do next, we're doing it from a place of real clarity. So instead of hundreds of thoughts, we've got one or two thoughts going on. So it's much easier to make decisions, much easier to prioritise. It's far less stressful physiologically and just in terms of mental capacity. It's far less stressful and difficult to deal with noticing a few thoughts in the mind rather than being overwhelmed by the cluttered mind that is the person on the left there. And when we see clearly, we can see how actually, in some situations, we're making our own suffering worse by how we're thinking about it and how we're responding to it. So we can actually ease a lot of the difficulties we experience in life by recognising how we add to them because of how we think about them and how we respond to them. When you're aware of what the mind does and how that affects the body and our experience, it's useful to remind ourselves that it's not our fault. We didn't choose this body, we didn't choose this mind. This is what we've got. And if we can understand what's behind our responses and how we think about things, again, it gives us choice, but at least it just gives us a sense of, all right, okay, I get why this is happening. So we have these three emotion regulation systems. Now, this comes from the work of Professor Paul Gilbert, who's done a lot of work around self-compassion. And he's developed this sort of visual to demonstrate these three emotion regulation systems. And what he says is they work best when they're in balance. So the blue system is the drive system. It's the one that gets us out of bed, gets us doing stuff, helps us progress in life and perhaps in our career. It's motivating. It's about striving and achieving and goal setting. It's a very wanting kind of system. So it's activating. If you imagine a life without that, it would be a bit boring, a bit flat. So it really gets us energised towards achieving things. And we get dopamine when that system is active. And dopamine is a really powerful hormone which gives us that sense of achievement. You know, that feeling when you've done something, you're like, yay, well, that feels pretty good. And sometimes it's even just ticking something off your to-do list. You go, yay, achieved something. It's the dopamine that's giving you that feeling. We've got the red system, which is the threat system, which is understandable why that exists. So that's that's where fight, flight, and freeze comes from. So it's both an activating and an inhibiting system. So it activates us to react if we need to run away, or it prevents us from doing something that might cause us harm. So it's clearly a very important system. The adrenaline is an important factor in that, but adrenaline when it's too much and it's raised for too long, starts to have negative consequences, as does cortisol. So we need to be aware of the potential impact on our physiology of too much of cortisol, which is described as the stress hormone. So the drive and the threat system, clearly important. It gets us up, gets us doing stuff, gets us achieving. And the red system just gives us a bit of, whoa, hang on, just check out what's going on here. Just make sure there's no danger around. And then there's this third system, the soothing system, which our ancestors were much better at bringing into balance than we are today, because they would make sure that they had their cave and they had their fire and they were set up and they'd go out and hunt and they'd get food and they'd come back. And when all of that was sorted, they had safety, they had warmth, they had shelter, they had food, they would sit and eat and then they would just relax. And they would just be content that they had nothing to worry about and nothing to achieve. And that soothing system is a really important part of balancing out physiologically, but also mentally, the stresses and strains of what the other two systems do for us. When you look at those three circles, if I was to ask you to, if I was to give you 3 coloured pencils or pens and ask you to draw what these circles look like for you on a day-to-day basis, if you were to draw it proportionally, just in your own mind think, where do you spend a lot of your time? Which of your systems are active a lot? You know, for some people, it's the blue. It's like, I'm all about achievement. Yeah. For some people, it's actually because of what's going on for me right now, I'm kind of in threat. You might have a large green circle, but in my experience of doing this, most people find that they bounce between the blue and the red. Is that? I'm getting a few nods. Yeah, we bounce between the blue and the red. And that's what Paul Gilbert's found in his research, that we're bouncing between the blue and the red, so we're craving these hits of dopamine. And there's some evidence to suggest that dopamine's as addictive as cocaine. So watch out, but we are addicted to dopamine. Some people were craving it. But also we're being negatively impacted by the effects of our threat system being active more than it needs to be. You know, it used to be that we would be concerned about threats in our immediate environment, but now we can see what is going on anywhere in the world as it's happening in all its graphic detail. That keeps our threat system activated more than it needs to be. So where does mindfulness fit in? First of all, it helps us to recognise what's going on in our own systems. So we start to recognise, am I striving so much to achieve something that I'm not being aware of what's going on right now? Am I actually so worried about what might happen in the future that I'm actually causing myself stress? Or am I building in enough time in my day or my week to just be a human being instead of a human doing, which is what most of us are, or certainly a lot of us are. So mindfulness helps us to step into the green, really is the key message. And so let's look at what is the practice of mindfulness. So how do we activate this system? It's about paying attention. So said that already, but what do you pay attention to? You can pay attention to anything and everything. So whatever you're doing in the course of your day, you can be mindful about. Whether it's drinking a glass of water, eating your lunch, having a conversation with someone, walking from here to there. The thing is that because there's a lot of other stimuli going on when we're doing those things, our mind can easily wander. So that's why we often use an anchor, which is in the present moment. The anchor we tend to start with when we're practicing mindfulness is the breath, because the breath is always with us. So it's really portable. It's only ever in the present moment. So each breath can only ever be in the present moment. So it is a really useful anchor to bring your attention back to. Similarly with the body can't be anywhere other than in the present moment. So if you bring yourself back to a feeling of how the body feels, that will automatically bring your mind and your body back together. And we can also use sound. So when we're practicing mindfulness, kind of opening your awareness up to hearing sound, and the fact that sound comes and goes, it changes, it doesn't stay the same all the time, is another useful way to just be with the present moment. And so what mindfulness is about is you choose one of those anchors, and we're going to do this practice in a moment. You choose one of those anchors, and you just give yourself the opportunity to just be in the present moment. And that's the thing we start to learn when we practice mindfulness. Here's what's going on, here's the science bit, because it's not just anecdotally that mindfulness is good for you, makes you feel better, you know, helps you focus or whatever. There's actually changes going on within the brain, and through fMRI scans now, we can actually see what's going on in the brain and can see the changes. And neuroplasticity means that we can actually change the way the brain looks and functions when we practice mindfulness. So I mean, it's fascinating stuff. The wandering mind, the names are there if you're interested, but I'm not going to begin to try and pronounce them. But basically what this is saying is when the mind is wandering, there's lots of different parts of the brain active. So there's a bit of the brain that's about self-referencing. So we're kind of comparing ourselves to others and going, how do I come across, how am I looking to other people? There's the bit that's processing all the information. There's a bit that's looking at that kind of creative bit that's going, ooh, making connections with different things. So our brain's really busy when it's wandering. And in 2010, there was an interesting piece of research done at Harvard by two medics there, Killingsworth and Gilbert. And the title of their research paper was, "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." Because what they found was they had a group of subjects, and periodically throughout their day, they would be alerted. And when they were alerted, and I think it was just an alert on their phone, they had to stop and they had to write down what they were doing in that moment and what they were thinking about to see whether what they were doing and what they were thinking about matched. And what they found was for 47% of their day, they were thinking about something different to what they were doing. So their mind was wandering for almost 50% of their day, which is interesting enough. But the second thing that they asked them to do was to say, in that moment, how happy were they? And they found that people rated themselves less happy when their mind was wandering. So it's not just that this is exhausting for the brain and perhaps isn't the most effective use of our mental capacity. We're actually not as happy when our mind is wandering. So when we start to become aware of the mind wandering, so when we start to practice mindfulness and we notice the mind wandering, so the insula and the cingulate cortex, particular parts of the brain start to pick up on that and go, oh, okay, hang on, I see what's going on here. The awareness bit is the critical bit, because if you're not aware, you can't do anything to change it. So you're aware of it, you continue to practice, and you continue to redirect your attention, which is what we've just done there. So when you start to notice the mind wandering and you go, oh, come back to the breath, then other parts of your brain are going, right, okay, so I need to do something different here. And we get to the point where when the mind is focused, I mean, you don't have to be a neuroscientist, which I'm not, to show you that, or to see that the brain looks a lot more efficient. It looks a bit less chaotic, a little bit less stressful when you're just focusing on one thing. And that practice we did there, where you notice the mind wandering and you maybe notice thoughts coming into your mind, what we're really starting to do is this process of letting go. Instead of feeling we have to attend to every single thing that comes into our mind, we start to be able to see the thoughts a little bit like clouds moving through the sky. And it might be an analogy you've heard before. The sky is always massive and expansive and blue. If you go in an aeroplane and go above the clouds, you can see it's always like that. If you live in Scotland, it doesn't always look like that. Usually kind of a grey colour. But the thing is that our mind is that big expansive blue, but our mind is obscured by all the thoughts and all the stuff going through our mind and our thinking about what's going on in the body. A little bit like the clouds and the planes and the birds and the insects. When we practice mindfulness, we can see them as individual entities that we can choose whether to engage with or let go of. So the practice of mindfulness is about allowing thoughts to move through your mind, not making the mind go blank, which is a sort of common misconception that we're trying to, and some forms of meditation are about trying to clear thoughts, but mindful meditation is acknowledging the thoughts as they move through the mind, but not having to jump on them, not having to engage with them. So it means you're not your thoughts. You don't then associate with all the thoughts that you have. Oh God, I must be a really angry person because I have a lot of angry thoughts. No, you just have angry thoughts. We all do. The more you pay attention to them, the more you'll start to think that that's actually who you are. So this process of noticing what's happening and then being able to let it go is a really powerful part of mindfulness. And just on that point about mindfulness in everyday life, something you might want to do if you're not already doing it is choose something that you do every day. Brushing your teeth, taking a shower, making a cup of tea, whatever it might be, something that you do every day, and just bring this sense of awareness to it, using all of your senses, what you can see, hear, feel, taste, touch. Just use that as your pause for however long it takes to do the activity. See if you can really focus, and when you notice the mind wandering, coming back to what it feels like to be doing that activity. So mindfulness isn't all about sitting meditating, but the sitting meditating helps to do the stuff in everyday life. So it kind of goes together. But this is a really good starting point. And just a sort of a final practice before we go, and I'd love to spend a lot more time on this because I think this is really critical. Mindfulness isn't just about the practices that we've done, the practice of noticing the mind wandering and coming back to the support. It's about the attitude we bring to whatever we find there. And we bring kindness and compassion into the 8-week course right from the start. Because when we start to really look at and really experience our experience as it's happening in the moment, it is not always pleasant. So being able to be kind and compassionate to ourselves as that's happening is really, really important. And so we cultivate kindness and compassion as we practice mindfulness. And there's this very, very portable, quick, easy practice that was developed by Kirsten Neff and Chris Germer, and it's called a self-compassion break. And it's 3 phrases you say to yourself, and you can come up with your own phrases, but the essence of it is, when you notice your present moment experience is challenging, you can just say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. And they advocate actually putting your hand on your heart, because there's that connection that activates the green system. So you don't have to have connection with other people, you can connect with yourself. This is a moment of suffering. So just acknowledging, this is not what I want it to be right now. And the second part is difficulties are every part of everyone's life, because that's the common humanity. Everyone, in some way, shape or form, is having a challenge. And I think when you look around the room today, and knowing that there's a wider LAM community out there, not just in the UK, but overseas as well, you know, it could be that in that, doing a self-compassion break, you know, actually there's other people in the country, in the world, who are also experiencing something similar to what I'm experiencing. That can just give that sense of I'm not alone. And then the third part is, and may I respond with kindness. So what do I need from myself right now in response to this difficulty? And only you will know the answer to that. But it's just taking that moment to, this is a moment of difficulty. Difficulty is a part of everyone's life. I know I'm connected to a wider community. What do I need right now? So finally, and this is a kind of sort of health warning really, or sort of word of caution. Mindfulness is not a panacea. It doesn't make everything better. It doesn't cure life's problems. It doesn't mean that suddenly your life is going to be blissful. It certainly has, can help you to improve some of those challenges or make them feel less challenging. But this quote from Jon Kabat-Zinn, I think, it sums it up. So it's not that mindfulness is the answer to all life's problems, but that life's problems become clearer when seen through the lens of a clear mind. So that, for me, is why we practice mindfulness, because it just gives us the choice to respond to our experience with a bit more clarity, a bit more conscious awareness, a bit less reactivity. And mindfulness isn't for everyone. So I'm not saying that everybody should practice it. So after today, you might think, that's not for me. That's absolutely fine. But if you think there's been something today that would be useful for you, then yeah, start with something small and see where it leads you. And in the absence of having sort of handouts or anything, on my website, I've got a free ebook that you can download. So you can have a look at that. It's got 10 steps to bringing mindfulness into your everyday life. So it doesn't all have to be about meditation, although that is in there as well. So there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know if you've got time for questions.